welcome to the Glenn Mercer Show. You could find us across all your favorite podcast platforms. You could find us on YouTube. And please remember to subscribe. And you can find us at realmeneatplants.com. My guest today, Sarina Farb, is a science educator, speaker, and vegan advocate who's working to create a peaceful, just, and sustainable world for all beings. And speaking as one being to another, Sarina, I really appreciate that.
Thank you so much, Glenn. And I appreciate everything you do too.
Well, thank you. You know, you've been lucky in one way. You were born vegan. Tell us how that happened. How did you arrange that?
I wish I could tell you how I arranged that, because I would arrange it for everyone.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was born and raised vegan in Kansas. Um, my mom had, her journey to veganism was a long one, but the final stages were she was working in the pharmaceutical industry, and part of her job took her to visit and see the inside of animal testing labs, pig farms, and chicken hatcheries.
Oh, so the company that sent her there didn't know what they were doing.
Yes, they were making an enemy for themselves eventually.
Yeah.
But yeah, and it was what she saw inside those facilities, especially the chicken hatchery, that was really the turning point for her. And she went vegan and knew then that she wanted to raise any future kids she had vegan. Because, the angle she was really seeing it from was she was meeting these people who she saw doing atrocious things to animals. And then she'd go out to dinner with them or, schmooze with them. And they seemed like otherwise good, kind, caring people who were simply able to sort of flip a switch in their head and turn on and turn off, their compassion very selectively. And she saw that and realized she wanted to raise children that would not turn a blind eye to any injustice in front of them, no matter how normal or accepted it was by the rest of society. And that is how I ended up here.
I'm guessing there was a dad involved too, yes?
Yes, yes. When my parents met, my mom went vegan, and then when she went vegan, she'd never met another vegan in real life. So the idea
Huh.
of dating a vegan was not really even an option. But she knew she wanted to raise her future children vegan and keep a vegan home. And so she asked him when they met to agree to that. And he did. And then by the time I was, 6 months to a year old, he was also fully vegan as well.
Okay, well, maybe you helped change him during those 6 months.
Yeah, I would like to think so. I think it was probably more the vegan events and festivals and conferences
Uh-huh.
and protests that my mom was dragging him to. But yeah, maybe me too.
Do we know if your first word was vegan? Was it tofu or tempeh or anything like that?
Not that I know of, but
Mhm.
I did name our cat that we adopted Maple because he was sweet like maple syrup.
Okay.
Um, and I had an apron that said Sarina is cooking tofu.
Okay. Do you still have that apron somewhere?
That's a good question. I have a picture of me in the
Yeah.
apron. I
That
don't
apron could be
know
worth a lot of money.
about the actual apron.
Yeah. Do you have any siblings? Vegan siblings?
Yeah, I have a younger sister. She's 4 years younger, and she's also vegan. She
Okay.
lives in a different state now
Okay.
than Kansas City, where we were raised. But yes,
So the whole family has been vegan and it's worked out just fine, right?
yes, yes, it has.
Okay. Now, at what point did you decide that this isn't just the way I eat? This is something that's important to tell other people about.
Probably when I was 7-ish was
Wow.
around the first time. I'm sure I was talking about it before then too. But when I was 7, my parents came up with this idea to give me my own food choices, as they called it.
Hmm.
And their idea behind this, especially in a world where they didn't know many other vegans or people raising vegan children, they were afraid that like if this was forced on us as we got to be teenagers or older, that we would rebel. And they didn't want that to happen. So my mom's idea was like, if we make it their choice now and take away any kind of, us forcing it on them now, then hopefully at 7 years old, they'll still keep being vegan, and that won't be the thing that they rebel over when they get to be teenagers. And the other thing, when I say they gave me my own food choices, it was not like, framing is so important. And they did not frame this as, you don't have to be vegan anymore. You can choose to be vegan. The way they framed it was, up until this point, you haven't been able to read. So we read labels for you. We ask questions for you. We determine what's healthy, what's ethical, what's sustainable. We make all these educated choices for you about what we eat. Now they said that you're getting to be 7 and you can read on your own. We're going to teach you about all the reasons why we don't eat various things. And then it will be up to you to read labels and ask friends questions. And it will be up to you to make educated choices about what you eat. So it
And
was,
you were 7 years old when they had this talk
yes.
with you. Wow. I'm
Yeah.
guessing you
So,
were a smart 7-year-old.
well, I could definitely read.
Okay.
And they gave me this stack of flashcards that had an ingredient name on one side, and then the other side had a description of what it was and how it was made. And so this was things like gelatin, casein, whey protein, milk powder, any of these ingredients that are less obvious than meat that you look for in products to see if they're vegan or not. And so, yeah, so I had to be able to read and describe how each of these things was made and why we didn't eat them before I was given my own food choices.
Okay.
And there were other things in there like artificial colors and high fructose corn syrup that weren't purely, say, ethics related, that my parents at that point chose not to feed us for health reasons primarily. And so those were in there too. So again, it was here's all these different reasons, all these different things we don't eat for various reasons. And it wasn't, you don't have to be vegan anymore. It was, now you can read labels and you know these reasons for yourself and you can decide what you eat out of the home. It was still in our home, my parents still would buy, purchase, cook the food, determine what we ate. And this was, I could spend my own money on it. If I was at a friend's house or at school and someone offered me something, that's when it was up to me to choose what I ate. Um, and all that really changed for me is, like I said, kind of the question you asked, like, that's when I really started becoming an activist, because when you learn how things like gelatin are made, most children or anyone really should hear that information and absolutely not want to eat that. Um, and that was the case for me. So I definitely stayed vegan. I didn't really change anything I was doing. But I remember I did competitive gymnastics, and we'd get these goodie bags full, usually of candy at our competitions. And I would start going through the goodie bag, like reading the label, picking up pieces of candy, looking at it, and then giving it away to friends if it wasn't vegan. And I remember one day, about this time after I'd gotten my own food choices, reading something, I don't know what it was, but some piece of candy, and it had gelatin. So I'm giving it away. And this other girl goes, well, what's wrong with this? Like, why can't you eat this? And I'm like, oh, I can eat it. I choose not to eat it. That was a big line I used to say.
Hmm.
And then she's like, okay, well, why do you choose not to eat it? And I'm like, well, it has gelatin. Do you know what gelatin is? And she's like, no. So then I proceeded to describe in graphic detail all this information I now had about how gelatin was made and what it was. And I remember that was one of my first moments of really facing the reality of how difficult change is, and that it's not as simple as, oh, once we, have different information, we change what we do. Because I remember thinking and feeling so certain that once I told this girl what gelatin was, that she would be horrified. And I just remember she listens to me and goes, oh, whatever, and popped the candy in her.
And that
So
is the story of our world.
yes. So to answer your question, once I learned that information for myself, that was really when I first started becoming an activist and sharing it, especially because, the biggest question that I had as a child was, my parents framed this as, we love animals, we don't eat them. So when you hear that as a kid and that's what you grow up with, you say, okay, so then do my friends not love animals? Like, what does this mean for other people? And so they would explain that away by saying, well, not everybody knows this information. We know this information, so we choose differently. And while that's a great way of explaining it to children, unfortunately, that's not the entire reality. That's a piece of it. But in my head, that meant if I just gave this information to everyone, then everybody would obviously want to change.
Right. Um, and it is pretty hard for someone not to know when they're eating turkey that it's from a turkey, right?
That is true, yes.
I mean, some foods, I guess, when I guess when they say sirloin steak, they might not be able to figure out cow, but turkey is definitely a turkey.
Yeah.
Um, so did science become your subject? Was science your main subject?
Yeah, so I competed in science fairs throughout high school. Both, I was a big nerd. I did competitive debate and science fair research. And my junior and senior year in high school, I was actually working in and with some grad students in a university professor's lab to do my research. So I got very into science in high school with these science competitions and the research I was conducting.
What kind of research?
So at the time, I was working with breast cancer cells, human breast cancer cells in culture, growing them in a lab. And
In high school?
yes.
In high school, I think I was planting dandelions or something. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, like I said, these were not the kind of science fair projects for the most part you could do in your backyard at that point. It was pretty common to try and get into a lab. And I had a project in mind, and I literally just started calling professors at the University of Kansas and found a professor that was willing to let me come in and kind of teach me about the lab and conduct my research there. Um, so yeah, so I was growing breast cancer cells in culture. And then what I was really kind of testing, I was looking at the chemicals bisphenol A, BPA, that a lot of people know about, like on plastics. Oh, it's BPA free. And the replacement compound, BPS. And at the time, this was like 2010, 2011, it was when people were starting to talk about like, chemicals and plastics being hormone disruptors. But we didn't know as much as we do now, and there's a lot more research that's come out. So at the time, everybody was labeling everything BPA free, and people were just buying it assuming that was good. And what people didn't realize is that most companies were using a very similar compound called BPS instead of BPA and calling it BPA free. And because BPS was unknown, it had not been tested at all. So it wasn't that we knew it was safer, it was there was just nothing about it. So nobody knew to be concerned about it. And so what I wanted to do was test that compound. So I was working with BPA and BPS and comparing their ability to promote the growth of cancer cells, breast cancer
What,
cells
what
in
in high
a lab.
school?
Yes,
And so did you come to a conclusion in high school about this?
I did. It was, very preliminary, but at the time it actually appeared that BPS was as bad, if not worse, than BPA for its estrogenic activity.
Did you bring those results to the college professor who let you use his lab?
Yeah, I mean the professor whose lab I was working in, she knew, and but I shared those results at several national and international science competitions. And that was actually where I started to see how biased and corrupt a lot of our system and scientific institutions are, because even at the high school science fair level, a lot of the judges and prizes come from the pharmaceutical industry, the plastics industry, they come from the industries. And so it's not this like pure scientific exploration that we might think. And I actually had one year, it was a uh, bioscience competition run by a company in the pharmaceutical industry, actually. But I presented this research, and I had a judge that held me back from advancing to the next level. And he came and talked to me afterwards because, and said, like, your presentation skills were so good, like, you're clearly passionate, but I have an issue with your project. And I said, oh, what is your issue with my project? And he said, because the other thing is my research was talking about BPA and BPS being in receipt paper and getting on our fingers. So it wasn't just about the plastics industry. And he comes to me and he goes, well, I work in the paper industry and I just disagree with the premise of your project. And I said, what do you mean you disagree with the premise of my project? I'm like, I cited like 40 published peer-reviewed studies in my review of literature to lay the foundation for why I did this. And he's like, I work in the paper industry and our official stance is that it's fine. So I just disagree with your project. BPA is
Well,
safe.
that's very solid reasoning.
Right. And I'm like, you can't just disagree with the premise of my project. Like, tell me what study I got wrong. Tell me what I interpreted wrong. Tell me, what was
Right.
the flaw? What was, he had nothing. So I literally got held back because one of my judges worked in the industry that uses BPA and BPS and just believes, without reason, as far as I could tell, that both chemicals are safe, and therefore he didn't like my project.
Wow.
So I started learning lessons about that kind of industry bias in things very early.
Now, have other scientists gone on to confirm the results that you got in high school?
Yes, there's now a lot of published research showing that BPS is as much of an endocrine disruptor as BPA is.
Well, that's remarkable. And they probably don't give you credit when they publish their papers, do they?
No, I thought about trying to publish my work at the time, because I had friends in the science fair world that were submitting their studies to journals, but I had been working on that project for like 2 years at that time, and my drive and ambition to completely rewrite it in a format that was publishable ran out.
Uh-huh.
And I decided I was ready to go to college and move on to something else. So I did not end up publishing it.
And where did you go to college?
I went to college at Grinnell College. It's a private liberal arts school in Iowa.
Yeah. And did you major in science there?
I majored in biochemistry and policy studies there.
Okay. So what was the evolution of your thinking about what you wanted your career to be during those college years?
That's a good question. Going into college, I thought I wanted to get my PhD in biochemistry and work in research, work in a lab. Um, and as my college years progressed, I started a vegan organization on campus and I started hosting events. And that was really when I became, I mean, I'd been an activist my whole life, but through high school, my priorities really had been academics, science fair, debate. I wasn't, doing as much. Most of my activism was going to events that my mom was doing stuff at and helping her. And through college was really when I started doing a lot of reading on my own about animal rights literature and philosophy and all these, different philosophical approaches to things, and really became very deeply passionate about it on my own in a way that I hadn't been before. I was developing my own ideas, my own theories about, abolitionism and effective advocacy. I had a couple different periods of following other people in the movement and kind of being all in on their approach. And yeah, so I was still into science, but I was becoming interested in all of this. And then at the same time, in my science classes, even in biochemistry, which I had picked as being an easier degree to avoid animal experimentation and animal exploitation in, I was also becoming increasingly frustrated with realizing even if you're not doing direct research on animals, the products of animal exploitation are so embedded into so much, even in cell biology and biochemistry. And we'd be doing a lab, and I'd realize we were using some enzyme, and the bottle is labeled rabbit enzyme, or goat, and IgG goat this, and little things that like we're mixing chemicals and doing other stuff. Like there's no animal here, but then all these little things had it. And in cell biology, most cells in a lab are grown in a medium that uses fetal bovine serum, which is a horrific product. And it's extracted from like a baby cow heart at the slaughterhouse. And so I'm becoming increasingly frustrated through my college years with being unable to avoid or having a lot of difficulty doing things on the type of science I want to do without running into animal products, and then becoming increasingly passionate about the animal rights and philosophy side of things. And I actually had an internship at a lab in between, I think it was the summer after my freshman or sophomore year. And it was a contract lab that did non-animal testing, and they called themselves an animal welfare friendly lab. Like it was someone who was vegan and worked in the animal advocacy space told me about it. And so I was assuming it would be vegan or very, in that direction. I wouldn't have these same issues since they're intentionally trying to do alternatives to animal testing for companies. And that internship was very enlightening because even though they don't work with any live animals, again, for safety testing, almost all of their assays in that lab involved animal products. They got a donation of like cow eyeballs from a slaughterhouse down the street, and that's how they were testing, because this was a legal requirement. They were kind of doing contract work for cosmetic companies and chemical companies that just needed this to check a box. And so instead of testing it on a live rabbit's eyes, they're using these eyes, cow's eyes from a slaughterhouse, and they were able to test some of the same things even though it wasn't in a living animal. But there's like literally buckets of cow eyeballs in the lab and bottles of blood and just all these different things. And that was like a real tipping point for me where I realized I would either have to, potentially change some of my ethics or have a different, approach to things and do things I wasn't comfortable with, even in the name. And there were people doing this. I had other vegans that were like, well, yeah, I think this is so much better than, live animal testing. This is how we come up with alternatives. And, this is a byproduct from the slaughterhouse. But I just really wasn't personally comfortable with that, and it did not fit with my ethics. And so I really was starting to feel like I would have to compromise to continue in the direction of the science I wanted. There are scientific fields where you don't have to do that, but in the things that I was interested in and had been working in, that field just felt like it was increasingly difficult, and it wouldn't be possible to maintain my ethics and do the stuff I wanted to do. So I kind of then started to realize that I really wanted to work in vegan advocacy. But at the time, I was very, very idealistic and had very, very high standards and a very specific philosophical way I wanted to approach things. So I couldn't see myself working for any of the nonprofits at that time, any of the PETA or the Humane Society of the United States, any of these big organizations. At the time,
Yes. What was your objection to those organizations?
well, I was I was very abolitionist in my thinking. So I didn't want to do anything that promoted welfare reforms or baby steps or and both of those organizations had done some stuff in that way. Beyond that, I was in a very, very rigid box about what I believed was effective and was the right way to do activism. And so I didn't think I would be able to work for an organization like that and do the activism I wanted to do. So I was in this place of like, I had no idea how to make money or, do what I wanted to do. Because then I also was listening to people that were very, very against making money off of animal advocacy and veganism at the time. Very kind of an anti-capitalist, anti-business approach. And some of the people pushing that idea had, tenured university positions that were providing, they're like, you shouldn't make money off of activism. You should just have another normal job and do activism on the side. And I'm like, well, that's great if you're a tenured university professor.
Mhm.
But what is someone who's not supposed to do? But I was still very caught in that line of thinking, just a lot of very, very ideological, very rigid thinking at the time. And so I basically had no interest in applying to almost any nonprofit because I was afraid they would tell me how I had to do activism and I wouldn't be able to do it the way I wanted. So I ended up then, after I graduated, actually, I did find a very small nonprofit to work with who I felt like our views and values were very aligned, as aligned as they could be at the time. And I went and worked with them for a year
You want to tell
until
us who that was?
it was a Tribe of Heart. They produced The Witness and Peaceable Kingdom.
Okay.
Um, and we had, a lot of alignment and I really enjoyed working with them. They were my dream job during that period. Um, and then shortly after that, I realized they were not my dream job anymore. There were things that were not a good fit between us. Um, and it was less ideological and more kind of the situation. And I was like living with their family members. We were, working and living all together kind of. And yeah, there were things about it that did not end up working out. And so I left that and learned a lot about myself in that process, I will say. And then I felt very lost after that because I felt like the one group or organization that I was super ideologically aligned with, wasn't a perfect fit anymore. What was I going to do now? So I did a little bit of traveling and did some other stuff, and then went into teaching high school and got a job teaching high school chemistry and environmental science at a private high school in Kansas City.
Okay, so now you find yourself sort of in mainstream society in a high school
Yes, yes.
with
And yeah,
people who are eating animals.
yes.
How
Which,
did that work out?
well, I actually loved it. I loved the job. I loved teaching
Mhm.
science. That felt a lot better than working in a lab. I'm very extroverted. I like working with people, so getting to be in a classroom with students all day. And I had a lot of opportunities to talk about veganism with them. The school
In
was,
the classroom.
well, I made opportunities in the classroom.
You didn't get in trouble for that?
Um, no, I got a little bit of pushback in some certain other areas, but um, students asked me questions. What can I say if students
Uh-huh.
ask me questions about things? And we had a lot of, I would tie it into chemistry and environmental science. It's very related. I was able to show cowspiracy. Um, the abridged student version of it I actually showed to the AP environmental science students in class. And in chemistry, it was less connected, but it would come up sometimes. I'd tie it in when I could. Even things like, and this is how I brought it up, um, one of the classic hands-on activities we do in chemistry is with building s'mores and using s'mores to determine like limiting reactants in a chemical reaction. So you
I didn't know that s'mores were like a scientific uh, uh, thing that you could do
Well,
experiments with.
you can make them that. So it was this activity where students have a plate of graham crackers and marshmallows and pieces of chocolate, and then you give them the equation for a s'more, which is 2 graham crackers plus 1 marshmallow plus 4 pieces of chocolate equals 1 s'more. And you have them write it out like it's an actual equation, and they have to determine what the limiting reactant is, which thing will you run out of first. It's a great activity, actually. But of course, I got all vegan ingredients for it. And since the students knew I was vegan, they would ask and they'd be like, wait, what makes regular marshmallows not vegan? So even just doing an activity like that and having the ingredients I used be vegan brought the conversation up.
Did that
Um,
bring us back to gelatin? Is there gelatin in?
yes, there
So
is.
back to when you're 7 years old, there's gelatin in this.
Yep.
Okay.
Great conversation piece, I guess we can say.
Yeah.
So yeah, and then the high school actually ended up having or letting me teach. They had this interim class situation over winter break where teachers created their own independent, real world sort of hands-on classes on a topic they were interested in. And it was for 3 days, and students were required to take one of these, but it was a separate schedule from the rest of the school year. And I submitted a Veganism 101 class, and they accepted it. They were okay with it. And I had a lot of students sign up for it. So I ended up teaching that 2 years in a row to about 80 students total, 40 the first year and about 40 the second year as well. And so I had them, it was the first year, there was an afternoon class and a morning class, so 20 students in each. And I basically had them for 3.5 to 4 hours every afternoon for 3 days straight.
So you taught veganism 101 in high school.
I did. So
You're the only
yeah,
one in America who can say that.
I loved it. That was so much fun. We brought in food samples, cooking demos. I made and fed them lunch. We watched documentaries, had discussions.
All
Um,
right, two questions. First,
yes.
did any of the kids go vegan? And second, did any of them have angry fathers who were butchers who came in to say, "What the heck are you teaching my kids?"
So, yes to the first question. I had them all fill out a note card at the beginning and end that rated on a scale of 1 to 10 how likely they were to actually go vegan. And I had at least one student, if not, I think a couple, that actually went from a 1 at the beginning of the class to a 10 at the end of the 3 days. So, no, they would never go vegan to, yes, I'm walking out of here going vegan. And then everyone else on average moved up that scale, like 4 to 5 points. They went from a 5 to an, 8 or 9 or something like that.
Mhm.
Um, so definitely had an impact. And one student in the class, then she came back the next year and actually did her senior seminar paper on the environmental impact of animal agriculture. So definitely had an impact there. And as for the second question, nobody from that group do I know had an angry parent. Um, but in my sort of homeroom class, students that I didn't actually teach or get to know as well, but they sort of checked in with me every morning, and they ate lunch in my room, and then also once a month we would have like sort of a homeroom lunch together. And I did get a little bit of pushback from them because one time we ordered pizza sometimes, and technically it was supposed to be me, the teacher, that asked everybody what they wanted and put in the order, and I refused to do that. The principal got upset at me over that. And I wasn't keeping them from doing it. The seniors could pool their money together, they could collect everyone's money, and then they could make the phone call and order the pizza. It was supposed to be the teacher for some reason, and I was like, they're like 17 and 18. They're about to go to college. If they can't handle making a phone call and collecting a student's, money to buy a couple pizzas together, like, they're going to have issues. um, but I was told repeatedly that I was supposed to be the one collecting the students' money, and that it was not right to have a student collecting everyone's money and holding it. But I was like, I'm not. It's gonna make a phone call and order pepperoni pizza or something. Like, I'm not gonna be involved in that process. So I did get in trouble for that a little bit. And then one time for one of these events, I genuinely offered, I was not trying to force anything on anybody. I said, if you want a free meal, um, I said, I'll buy the pizza for everybody one day. If you all are willing to try vegan pizza, I'll gift it to you. I'll order 4 pizzas, different flavors, all vegan, won't cost you anything. It'll be my, holiday gift. Um, and and that's on me. And some of the students were so opposed to that and felt like I was forcing veganism on them that they went and complained to the principal yet again. So
Oh,
no angry parents, but some students that were annoyed.
yeah. Well, they missed out.
Yeah.
So what did you do after the teaching gig?
So after teaching, I did that for a couple years, and then I was kind of thinking again at that point that what I really wanted to be doing was traveling around speaking about veganism. Speaking, public speaking has always been a big passion of mine. And I kind of put that out into the universe. I was making YouTube videos at that point too, and really making content and being online a lot. And I ended up getting a grant that just kind of fell into my lap, how it happened, and was an opportunity for me to quit speaking or quit teaching and traveling around speaking about veganism instead. And so I did that for the last 4-ish years, really.
So you've
Um,
been on the road. How do you create the events at which you speak?
So different ways, a lot of times, from having put so much content out and speaking in some places, I get invited to speak. So VegFest to local communities or groups invite me. And then I also would put out an email to my list and contacts kind of saying, oh, I'm kind of planning to drive, in my van on this route. Anybody along the way want to set stuff up for me? Some people would set up local community events, and others would say like, oh, I work at a university, or oh, I know someone who does, and they would invite me into their classroom or pass my info along to someone that had a relevant class that I could come speak in. And there's several universities where, due to one person, I've spoken in, 5 or 6 classes there, all kind of at one time.
Um, and so you have now been a vegan advocate for a pretty long time, though you're still young. So how do you feel that the movement has changed in that period of time? And are we having enough success that there's hope?
It's a deep question.
That's what I'm known for.
The big question. The movement has changed a lot. Um, I I will say for a little while, I thought we had sort of broken through. 2016 to 2019 was sort of the high peak of veganism, especially online and in influencer and social, worlds and stuff. It really felt like we were seeing these statistics come out that veganism was growing exponentially. It went from 1% of the population up to 6%. We had Beyond Meat and Impossible. We had all these new vegan companies coming out, being very successful. It was the era of the vegan influencer, tons of, like YouTube and Instagram had all these people talking about veganism and how it helped their health issues, and just all these different things were kind of really pushing it to the forefront.
Was that around the time of Cowspiracy and Game Changers?
Yep, kind of followed the release of Cowspiracy back in like 2013 or 2014 or something online, and then a bunch of documentaries, and then Game Changers. So there was this huge kind of vegan era. And I will say during that time, and it was so different from what I'd been used to, I remember getting on a plane once and hearing some people that sat down next to me talking about like Beyond Burgers and how they needed to get some or buy some in their restaurant. And I was in Kansas City. I think I was getting on a plane leaving Kansas City. The idea that I would hear random people I didn't know talking about a vegan burger was mind blowing to me. And I remember thinking, like, this has never happened before. This is so cool. And so I talked to them and I go, oh, wow, are you guys vegan too? And they go, no, we just run a restaurant and we know you got to have a vegan option these days. So we're talking about what to add to our menu, And so that was such an interesting moment for me because one, it felt mind blowing that these products were so popular and had entered the mainstream in such a way that whereas I would have assumed if someone was talking about a vegan burger, they would have been vegan in the past. That here's just two random people and they're saying everybody's got to have a vegan option. We just own a restaurant. I really thought that was a sign that the world had fundamentally changed, that we had broken through. Here we go. Like it's just up and up exponentially from here. And then we see COVID and just, the world's turned upside down. And then we have our political situation, of course, all these different things going on. And now I look around and I feel like something has happened and we are not at the peak of veganism that we were in 2019. It is definitely a different era. We see a lot more trending ex-vegans, all these vegan influencers during that time that were cheering it and pushing the cause. Many of them are not vegan anymore. It's not like it was the it trendy thing. It is not the it trendy thing right now. We see more vegan businesses struggling. I mean, all like a lot of small businesses are struggling, but vegan businesses, vegan restaurants, vegan events. Back in 2019, there was this level of excitement and hero worship. If you had a veg fest and brought big speakers in, it was, oh, are you most excited to see? Like there was just this real enthusiasm there. And now there's a lot of veg fests that, since COVID haven't been able to get, even like they're getting about half of the audience and attendees they used to get. And big speakers and big names don't seem to draw the enthusiasm that they did. Like there's just an energetic shift in society around this.
So the
And
irony is that the vegan momentum was broken by a zoonotic disease.
I mean, I think there's a lot more to it. I think it's probably been co-opted. Like one of the things we see with all these vegan companies and products, which is great, and we need those products and veganism to be mainstream, but it also opens the door for people to stop seeing veganism as this niche, hippie, health focused, whatever the different ideas people have had. And now they're able to look at it more as this, it's a corporate top down. They're trying to, push veganism on us. And I think this is true in the medical community too. It's like for years, most doctors have not been recommending a plant-based diet for health reasons. And finally, after years and years of this data coming out, right, we're starting to see some of our established health authorities and bodies and the Federal Nutrition Guidelines finally shifting more plant-based. And that then opens up the door for people to then claim that somehow, which this is not true, but seem to claim that now we're in the majority. We have the upper hand. We're pushing veganism. So now it's not just this like fringe hippie alternative movement. Now it's this big corporate bad mainstream movement. And I don't think that messaging is an accident. I don't have anything to back this up for certain. But we've seen this kind of thing time and again, where I think the ag industry is probably pushing that messaging. And, we see they've had messaging very strongly anti, impossible and beyond. And, a really good example is I actually made a video a while ago about Bill Gates and whether or not he was vegan, because when he invested in, I think it was Beyond, you saw kind of two reactions. One, you saw the vegan community thinking, oh my God, this is it. Like Bill Gates, one of the richest people on the planet, he's promoting veganism. But then he wasn't actually, because he was still eating all his same stuff. He just was invested in a vegan company, but people were, heralding him as some vegan hero. And while the vegan community was doing that, on the flip side, you saw people that were concerned about the influence of billionaires and powerful corporations and his vested interests and connections to Monsanto and the pharmaceutical industry. Then you see those people going, well, anything that Bill Gates promotes, I'm against. So if he's pushing beyond, then I'm never going to touch that processed corporate stuff. When it's like, there's so much more nuance here, which is, I think someone like Bill Gates is an opportunistic business person looking for any opportunity to invest in whatever he thinks is going to be the next thing. Veganism, plant-based products, they're growing and booming. Of course, he's going to want to invest in them. That doesn't mean he actually cares, like he's been championing and talking about climate change, and he flies in private jets around the world, and like the way he lives his life is not in alignment with whatever supposed values he's saying. He's a billionaire that wants to keep being a billionaire. So I think it was, in some ways wrong to champion him as a vegan hero when he was not and was actively eating and promoting other animal products. At the same time, of course, it's wrong to throw out things that he's backed simply because he's backed them. And so I made this video where I actually found video footage of him talking about his goal in Africa to be to increase backyard chicken farming from like 10% up to like 30% or something. He wanted to see a whole lot more backyard chicken farming and animal farming going on. So, and that was around the same time that, of course, people are like, he's a vegan hero, look. And then other people saying he's trying to push veganism on us. It's like, he's neither. He's actively trying to push animal agriculture, like the policies and things he's literally advocating for. He's advocating for genetically engineering bigger cows that feed more people meat in the name of climate change. Um, and so I kind of showed that as like, so are you against eating chicken and having backyard chickens because Bill Gates wants to have more backyard chickens? Are you rejecting that because you want to reject everything that a billionaire backs? So I think that's kind of one example of the dynamic I've seen, and that's really sort of what's taken over. You see this split where veganism has now been positioned as this liberal, climate change, corporate focused, government top down thing. And now backyard farming, animal agriculture, homesteading has been framed as the natural alternative, healthy, sustainable, and they're like being pitted against each other when that's lacking so much nuance. And the reality is, we do need some decentralized backyard farming, but we can do it with veganic agriculture. It doesn't have to be organic and regenerative versus processed corporate, plant-based products. If you don't want to eat Impossible Burgers, go eat a black bean burger. Like those still exist.
Right. And when you're doing the veganic agriculture, you learn that there's nothing particularly magical about cow manure, is there?
No, my mom does a lot of veganic gardening, and what she actually uses is okara, which is the leftover pulp from tofu making. And we have a local tofu company actually, near her town, and it's just a waste product. So she gets these giant bags of like tofu pulp that are the fiber left over, and they're very high in nitrogen, and they make a fantastic veganic replacement to manure.
Right. So Bill Gates proposed bigger cows? Is that what you said?
Oh, yeah, I mean, like all of his climate solutions have all been technological things that will obviously make him more money rather than actually stopping any of the problems and things causing climate change.
Bigger cows. Now, your background as a scientist is doing research. Um, But sometimes I think that, there are matters that we can try to elucidate with research. And there are some ideas that just prima facie, you ought to be able to contemplate it and say, no, we're not going that way.
Yeah.
The chances that our climate problems will be solved by bigger cows are not high,
How about
right?
cows eating a certain type of seaweed so they burp less methane? That's another
And
one.
Cargill has a solution. Masked cows, putting masks on cows. If only this were a planet full of giant masked seaweed eating cows, we'd be fine.
Obviously, that's the
Obviously.
solution.
So we're in kind of a pause then in the vegan movement, huh?
It's an interesting time in the vegan space right now, which is kind of why I've shifted my focus a little bit and decided that, with all of the polarization and conflict in the movement, out of the movement, um, my goal is now really to bring people together. I feel like community, authentic connection, seeing people as individuals and recognizing their humanity and the humanity in each other and having real in-person experiences outside of social media and the internet and whatever stuff people are scrolling on or being confused by. We need real connection, real communities in person, face to face with people and each other. Um, and that's kind of the solution and area I'm focusing on now.
Let me tell you what my experience was. I wasn't even a vegan yet. I was a vegetarian. I was living in San Francisco. I was about 24 years old. There was a restaurant. I doubt if it still exists, but I haven't Googled it. I think it was called the Good Karma Cafe.
Hmm.
And I would go there and I would get a bowl of brown rice with purple cabbage and tofu and beans and carrots. And, it was whole food. And, probably at the time it was 10 cents. I don't know, maybe $2. I don't know. It was very inexpensive. And and that wasn't the only such restaurant, but I could go to restaurants and have whole, healthy vegan meals. And now, so many of the vegan restaurants are vegan comfort food, and they're made with coconut oil, and they're fried. And when I go into the grocery stores and there's a couple of refrigerators full of vegan products, so many of them are made with coconut oil. And it feels like we have been co opted into a kind of not very healthy commercial culture.
Hmm.
And I miss the good old days of the hippies eating the brown rice with the cabbage and the tofu. So, do you feel that that's happened too?
Absolutely. I mean, my mom kind of joked that it was much easier being a healthy vegan back when I was growing up because you couldn't just go to the store and buy a variety of burgers and vegan cheeses and vegan ice cream. There was, maybe one brand that was sometimes available at some stores. And otherwise, you had to do a lot of cooking from scratch and make your own food. And I think again, it's a mixed bag because on the one hand, I like to think that having these other options does make it easier for more people to eat vegan who aren't going to have the time or want to cook or, these other things. On the flip side, I think we struggle with the messaging around that sometimes, and there's confusion, especially on the internet, because you do see a lot of people that now do associate veganism with promoting highly processed, salt and oil filled vegan products. Um, And while, you know, obviously they're still not a dead animal and they don't have the cholesterol, many of them do still have saturated fat if they're being made with coconut oil. Um, and, you know, I also work, I work with a nonprofit part-time now in lifestyle medicine. And it's very interesting seeing that people come to them who have been plant-based or vegan for a long time and are really still struggling with a lot of serious chronic health issues. And, you know, then they go on a more Esselstyn type, whole foods, plant-based, you know, oil-free, low-fat diet, and they're able to see results.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, so there's definitely there's so many different forces at work, and I think we have to remember what our goals are and share, you know, the information with people about, you know, no matter what, eating plants is better for the animals and better for the planet. But yeah, just because something is vegan doesn't mean it's a health food.
Right. And I've interviewed some people on this podcast, good people, kind people, intelligent people, but their attitude is, you know, all I care about is that there are no animals in it. And, you know, if it's made with coconut oil or it's fried food or whatever, it's fine with me. And my feeling is if you care so much about the animals, set an example for how healthy and thriving you can be.
Yeah.
Not, you know, don't make yourself look like all the sick people out there eating animals.
I used to be more in that camp. You
In
know,
which camp? Their camp or my camp?
yeah, no, just in like, I don't care, you
Uh-huh.
know, as long as it's vegan. Um, but that's really shifted for me in the last, you know, 4 to 5 years. A lot of the reason that shifted is because I've seen the shift in messaging and how I grew up thinking veganism was the hippie, alternative, healthy, you know, lifestyle. And
Right.
now we see the hippie, alternative, healthy lifestyle being people that are anti-vegan and you know, drinking raw milk and stuff now. And then I think it creates this dynamic where then like again, rather than nuance, we see doubling down of like, if you're vegan, you're promoting the processed stuff, but then vegans are like, well, you guys are just crazy for thinking anything natural is good, you know, and then defending processed stuff. And it's like, what if there's a middle ground, which is if you don't care about health and you want to eat the processed stuff, you can do that vegan or not. Great. And if you like, there's separate issues. There's highly processed foods. Some are vegan, some aren't. That doesn't mean they're healthy,
Right.
just because they're animal free. And, you know, we can have healthy whole foods. Um, and you know, I think the older I've gotten too, like I've, you know, young me didn't super care about health either. You know, college me, I was eating junk food in the dining hall and learning that Oreos were pretty good and I needed late night snacks. But now I'm like training for a half marathon in a month and
Whoa,
I go to the gym and lift weights 4 times a week. And I feel a whole lot better when I don't eat processed food. And that's just really not part of my diet anymore.
good. Well, speaking of healthy alternative hippie stuff, tell us about the Thrive Alive Fest.
Yeah, so this is my latest project. I'm co-organizing a festival with my friend Erin, who I met at the Woodstock Fruit Festival, actually. Um, and we
That
have
wasn't the
joined,
original Woodstock Festival, was it?
no, this is the Woodstock Fruit Festival. It's a
Okay.
raw vegan, talk about hippie. It's a raw vegan fruit festival.
You weren't alive during the original Woodstock Festival.
No, I was not, but I hear it was pretty cool.
That's what I hear. And I was alive.
Um, but yeah, so we have kind of joined forces to create our own dream festival. And a lot of this for me is motivated from that drive for community. I have found some of the most amazing community and support by going to vegan festivals, conferences, you know, things like this. there's just nothing like being in a room with 400 other people listening to the benefits of, listening to a speaker talk about the benefits of, vegan living or the power of our individual choices, and feeling like you're not the only one. You got a whole room full of people there with you. Like, that group energy and dynamic is so powerful. And then, eating together communal meals every day and kind of living together in a space, whether that's camping or, in a dorm setting. It's kind of like that old summer camp vibe, like it's adult summer camp, or you make friends a lot more quickly. They're a lot deeper and closer. And it's like this magical place of true, deep, authentic connection where at least I, and I think many others, have felt, totally welcomed and accepted for who we are, which is so different for many vegans and how they feel in the rest of the world. So we've kind of come together to create Thrive Alive Vegan Fest, which will be mashup, think like vegan summer camp, like adult summer camp vibes. So there's going to be games and camp activities. There's swimming, hiking, boating, evening bonfires, drum circles, jam sessions. So summer camp vibes smashed together with vegan health and wellness retreat. So we'll have speakers there talking about the health, environmental, and ethical benefits of veganism, giving keynote speeches, leading yoga sessions, boot camps, workshops, maybe even some cooking demos. And then also with a music festival. So we're also going to have, this is the exciting news that we just announced recently. I don't know if you know who Mike Love is.
Yes.
He's a vegan reggae musician. He is going to be our headline musician for the festival. So it's music festival with adult summer camp with vegan health and wellness conference and retreat, all smashed together in one for 4 glorious days on a 200-acre camp and retreat. So it's got.
And where is this?
It's Timber Lakes Camp and Retreat in Kansas, about 45 minutes to an hour outside of Kansas City.
And when are the dates?
September 18th to 22nd this year, 2025.
And the website is thrivealivefest.com.
Yes.
All right. Well, everybody should go there.
And
then
all
it'll be
meals
really
will be
crowded.
included too. So got that kind of summer camp vibe. Whole foods, plant-based.
Excellent. And our friend Silas Rao will be speaking, right?
Yes, he will.
Okay. So the website for that event is thrivealivefest.com. Your website is bornvegan.org.
Yes.
And everybody should check out Sarina at bornvegan.org. Sarina, it's such a pleasure talking with you. I hope you'll come back and do this again.
You too. Yes, this has been a great conversation and love your deep questions.
Well, I'm just famous for that. So we'll talk soon. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.